Episode number 71 of Making the Case. How sex lead us to making some bad decisions. Let's get it. Hey, what up, YouTube? It's your boy, your host, the one and only Dr. Jacob Isom, educator, author, speaker, entrepreneur, consultant, father, you know, a little bit of everything. Back at you with another episode of Making the Case. We're on episode number 71. Hopefully you get a chance to check out the other episodes. Yes, we've done quite a bit. But I think they'll be beneficial because a lot of the episodes actually build on one another. So you can get caught up, right? Of course, we got to go over our two channel norms. One, we attack points and not people. And then two, we don't do all the cussing and derogatory stuff, because we're professional over here. All right. So today's episode, how sex lead us to making some very bad decisions. So let's get into our opening statement, shall we? Now I really want to touch on this because it is of my belief, my opinion, that a lot of times the poor decisions that we make are of the sexual nature. Let's just think about it, right? A lot of the degeneracy in our society is related to sex. What do we have? We have prostitution. We have OnlyFans. Um, Single parent household are led by what? People making very bad decisions when it comes to not protecting themselves during sex, right? So a lot of bad decisions are actually made when it comes to the sexual nature, right? Um, of course, you could throw in porn, right? Even though a lot of people enjoy it, right? It's still I would say, a lower rung for our society. It's something that we can do away with, right? And will probably benefit us. And of course, we know sex is biological. I'm not trying to make the case that people should only have sex to procreate, even though that should be at the very top of the list, right? We know people are going to have sex for pleasure, right? We know this. So I always come at it from a very realistic, logical standpoint. Okay. If we know that people are going to have sex for pleasure, then we just need to make rules and standards behind the fact that we just need some order to our sexual behavior. Right. So that's kind of the standpoint I'll be coming at it with this episode, that we just need to make better decisions as it relates to sex. Sex doesn't need to be the only thing that we really just, are focused, right? And I know to the fellas, right? I know, right? I'm a fellow compadre myself, okay? I get it, all right? But we have to put things in perspective, and particularly for the reason that it is damaging our society, right? When it comes to grape, when it comes to the other things that I mentioned, right? These sexual acts, these sexual perversions are really damaging not only how we see men, we see women, our children are being raised in it. Look at our social media. It's sexual in nature, very much so. Our kids are looking at that. Look at television programs, radio, everything is sexual innuendos and things of that nature. So we just need to put a control on it. We need to get it under control because, in my opinion, it's to the point where it's very problematic, and we really need to kind of reel things in. Okay, but it's not going to come from the government. I tell you, it's not going to come from corporations because they make money off this stuff. It's going to have to be a grassroots, underground social movement, right? It just have to be. Now, will it happen? Not sure it will, but it takes platforms like this and other platforms to just bring it to your attention. Because even if it could change somebody's individual life, I think we win it. All right. So, of course, I got three pieces of evidence for you today to make my case of why, when it comes to sex, we make some very bad decisions. All right. So let's go ahead and get into my first piece of evidence, shall we? All right, so let's get into our first piece of evidence of why I believe that when it comes to sex, we make some very bad decisions. I did a video probably a couple months ago on sex, and I don't remember what angle I took. All I do know is this is definitely a different angle. I have one of my favorite platforms. If you follow me, you know I love to use Psychology Today because I'm very much into psychology, sociology, really any social science for that matter. So the title of this is Poor Judgment, Decision Making, and Sexual Arousal. So we're gonna come at it from the psychological angle of this, as I often do, because I think it's a very important thing to do. So let's read this and see what we agree with and what we don't. A frequently quoted study regarding the impact of sexual arousal on decision making was published in 2006. 25 male undergraduate students were instructed to masturbate to erotic photograph displayed on the computer and screen, and after achieving a very strong level of sexual arousal, answer questions about sexual preference. Now, that is very strange, but I get why studies like this have to be done. But I don't see, and of course, for those of you that don't know, usually these studies happen in colleges, and you do get paid, but um, not that much to do something like that. I hope their names weren't revealed in this. Anywho, um, some questions asked subject to access the lengths they would go to procure sex, including whether they would encourage a date to drink, slip her a drug, take her to a fancy restaurant, tell her they loved her when they in fact did not, and if they would try to have sex even as she said no. Other questions examined sexual risk taking, including the likelihood of using birth control. Kind of some of the things I was mentioning in the opening statement. Researchers for the study concluded sexual arousal acts as an amplifier of sorts. Activities that are not perceived as arousing when young males are not sexually aroused become sexually charged and attractive when they are, and those activities that are attractive, even when not aroused, become more attractive under the influence of arousal. So they're saying that when a man is aroused, because this study was done with men, that they typically tend to act outside of themselves, act outside of them characters when they're aroused. Duh, right? You need to do a study for that. The increase in motivation to have sex produced by sexual arousal seems to decrease the relative importance of other considerations, such as behaving ethically toward a potential sexual partner or protecting oneself against unwanted pregnancy or sexually transmitted diseases. Sexual arousal in some hijacks the brain, leading to a focus on immediate pleasure and gratification. Typically, after ejaculation occurs, a male then begins to consider and often worry about the consequences of sexual involvement. I wouldn't say he worried about the consequences. I just think that he's like, wow, did I really want to do that? And I really would like to go home, which we've all known as post nut clarity, for those of you that's heard that term before. Okay. A 2012 study is an informative bookend. In this latest study, first year college students received a web query of 28 different days as to whether they had engaged in vaginal sex on these days. Those who answered in the affirmative were then asked a series of questions about what they thought the interpersonal and intrapersonal consequences of the activity were. In short, you had sex earlier today. What are your thoughts now regarding this sexual activity? The researchers offered the participants a list of positive and negative consequences from which to choose. Negative interpersonal consequences include worrying about pregnancy, worrying about sexually transmitted diseases, worrying that their parents might find out. Well, they would have to be pretty young if they worried about that. Feeling the one has gone against his or her morals and ethics. I can tell you most people do not think about morals and ethics when they have sex. I can tell you that. Experiencing pain, not enjoying the experience. Positive interpersonal consequences, feeling physically satisfied, feeling more attractive, feeling cheered up. Negative interpersonal, worrying that a partner wants more commitment. I can see that. Worrying that the relationship is moving too fast. Worrying that another partner may find out. Worrying that one has harmed his or her reputation. Absolutely. Particularly when it comes to women, when it comes to being labeled, a whore. Positive interpersonal consequences, feeling close to one's partner, feeling one avoiding angering or knowing their partner, and then feeling one has enhanced his or her reputation. Participant reported at least one positive consequence on the vast majority of the days they had sex, and negative consequences were reported far less frequently. Still, many students reported worrying about at least one negative consequence of sex. In the interpersonal domain, the most commonly reported positive consequence was feeling closer to a partner, and the most common negative consequence were worrying a partner wanted more commitment. In the interpersonal domain, the most commonly reported positive consequence was feeling physically satisfied, whereas the most reported negative consequence was worrying about pregnancy, which makes sense. The researchers were particularly struck that there were few gender differences between males and females regarding perceived positive and negative consequences of sex. And I think you're starting to see that a lot more when it comes to the whole idea of sex between men and women. Women are not ashamed of having a bunch of sexual partners, even though men still care about that. Like women literally want to feel the same way about sex as men do, even though that's not realistic, but they still are doing it, right? So this study demonstrates that we tend to have positive thought following the shared consensual sex act, yet simultaneously negative consideration, even guilt may occur. Even in the heat of moment, we're able to minimize or ignore complications that may arise from sex until after the act occurs. Or, as the author of the 2006 study concluded, sexual arousal seems to narrow the focus of motivation, creating a kind of tunnel vision where goals other than sexual fulfillment become eclipsed by the motivation to have sex. So that's how someone can literally just be motivated to actually have sex versus looking at some long term. Because when they get aroused, of course, this is based off hormones. And we actually going to touch on that in another piece of evidence. So, we're more focused on, that's why we hear and talk about the hookup culture and people who are swingers and things of that. So we're more focused on the acts of being sexually satisfied versus building a relationship and having something that's sustaining, right? Even when people are getting in relationships, it's like people will break up with you if they're not sexually satisfied. Not saying it's wrong, just saying that sex is more of a priority versus duty when it comes to marriage and a long-term relationship, which to me, that narrative needs to change. All right. So let's get into our second piece of evidence and we're gonna dive a little deeper. Let's go. All right, so let's get into our second piece of evidence. We're still talking about how sex can lead us to making some very bad decisions. And I have an article from the Huff Post, not the Huffington Post, the Huff Post. And the title is When Good Sex Goes Bad, How to Avoid Making Bad Choices in Your Sex Life. I'm assuming they're going to talk more so about being in a relationship. Let's find out. All right. Here we go. Sex sales, the advertising industry says men think about sex every 7 seconds. A famous but completely fabricated stat says it's actually 19 times per day on average, with women's sex sidetracked an average of 10 times per day. So 19 to 10 is still almost double. All right. If you believe the media, then our whole lives revolve around sex. And while that isn't true, it's fair to say that many people in the West live in a relatively enlightened sexual time where sexual freedom is both relatively attainable and relatively socially permissible. And well, the media definitely pushes it, right? Some people, and remember, I talk about things being on levels, right? Some people are always talking and thinking about sex and wanting to have it sex, while some people are on the low end. But it's sexual innuendos and the acts of sex in movies and TV series are definitely pushing our face all the time and will have an influence. So, however, we as human beings are complicated creatures, and with this expanded option comes new challenges and consequences. Every week, I see clients who made their choices in their sex life that are directly damaging to their self-esteem and happiness, and yet they find themselves making the same mistakes again and again. It turns out that a BSC, bad sex choice, isn't just an occasional occurrence for some people, but a lifetime repetition for many. Nearly all of us commit a BSC mistake at one point in our life, and some are graduated with honors daily. Oh, I would agree with that, right? So what should you be looking out for in your own BSC behavior and how you can adapt this to better support your self-esteem and happiness? If you're a single female, sex and emotional roller coaster. In this day and age, many females feel they should be sexually liberated and engage in as much sex as they want, whenever they want, just as much as men. The problem with this is that very few women can separate sex and love, and the feeling of emotional attachment promoted by the increased oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which they also call the love hormone, will typically kick in for most females after sex, and it'll be the opposite for men post nut clarity, right? In my clinical practice, I often hear female clients obsessing over and wanting to have a relationship with unsuitable partners within the first few days after a sexual episode. So really, it's not a good thing for women. And I just was kind of mentioning that to have many sexual partners because they're going to have more stronger feelings than a man will. And it's just based off hormones, right? It's biology. Let's see. 50 Shades of Danger. Whilst any form of personal expression is almost always a positive thing, the most concerning thing about the 50 Shades of Grey was the number of females who started coming to my clinic informing me that they had engaged in some form of BDSM behavior suggested by other partner, which she later felt used, traumatized, and regretful about. Rather than the open mind and expressive experience than the woman thought she was going to undergo, she instead found herself making BSC of acquiescing to her partner's wishes ahead of her. See, I was just telling you about how movies, media, and stuff influence us. I guarantee you was a lot of people trying that stuff before they seen that movie. Guarantee you. Bad decisions. If you're a single male, sex is self-medication. Despite the obvious male advantages that patriarchal society offers, it's also come with some inherent destabilizing gender issues for men in particular. We still live in a highly damaging culture where real men don't cry and multiple rules dictate that your masculinity is linked to the number of women you sleep with. Yes, that's definitely a social issue, right? That we definitely need to change, right? And we need to stop shaming people for not having sex, men for not having sex, right? As such, many men slip into the terrible BSCs by using sex with multiple partners to drag themselves into a different emotional state. It often comes from households where emotions were not understood or dealt with very well, and it's a very long-term damaging BSC cycle to fall in. And as men, we're literally raised and born to try to sleep with women as early as possible. That's how we raise in a larger culture. And I know it'll be different in, the subcultures, but in a larger culture, like men are supposed to dominate and are supposed to find as many sexual partners as possible. So it's really a cultural thing, right? It's not a biological drive to sleep with as many women as possible. Oh, let's see what else. If you're in a relationship, reducing negative emotions to promote sex. Being in a relationship can be difficult, and you will almost always certainly notice highs and lows to your sex life. First of all, you may notice when they're distressing your relationship, the amount of sex you are having will often decrease. The most common relationship BSC is letting these negative emotions infiltrate your intimacy, while leads to nothing but bad outcomes. So, of course, like the longer you together, your sex is going to decrease, right? Which often sometimes lead to cheating and lead to people stepping out. But it's really two people having an understanding that yes, sometimes having space between when sex is had is actually beneficial because like it's almost like when you haven't seen somebody for a while, you need to be able to miss somebody. So you need to be able to miss having sex so it don't get too redundant and don't get bored. And of course, you got to spice things up. But I mean, let's see. Do I want to? Let me read this. Don't get me wrong, sex is a great part of everyone's life. It is a natural human need and can have many benefits, such as relieving stress. However, just like many things, alcohol, food, and internet, etc., it's good to make your sex choice responsible in order to live a fulfilling life. Trust your instinct when it comes to sex, whether you're single or in a relationship, and you will avoid having a BSC to set you back. Regardless of whether you're single or in a relationship, honesty is the best way to keep negative emotion between you and the other person as low as possible. And I would just say, to kind of wrap this up, that it's just good practice to make sure that you're intentional with people, make sure you're honest with people, and making sure that sex is not the number one and main priority, right? And even if it is, even if you say, you know what, we're in agreement that we're just gonna have sex and that mainly, make sure that like you're not wrapping other people in to the situation and you kind of keeping it contained, right? Because you don't want sex to kind of overrun or ruin your life. And then because remember, women are gonna get in their feelings when you're having sex with them. So you probably want to keep that to a minimum. All right. So let's get into our third piece of evidence and we're gonna wrap this episode on up. Let's get it.
Is sex good or bad for decision making? Let's dive into the neuroscience. First, the positives. Sex releases dopamine and oxytocin, boosting mood and cognitive functions. It also reduces cortisol, the stress hormone, helping you think clearly. Plus, better sleep after sex enhances your next day's decisions. But here's the catch: increased testosterone post sex can lead to riskier choices. An immediate hormonal shift might impair judgment. So, is sex good or bad for your decisions? It depends. Regular, balanced sex can improve cognitive functions and stress management, but timing is key. Avoid making critical decisions immediately after sexual activity to mitigate the effects of hormonal imbalance. Be aware of your mental state post sex and allow time for your cognitive functions to stabilize before making important decisions. Is sex good or bad for decisions?
All right, there you have it. That was my third piece of evidence to kind of wrap this episode on up about, sex impacting bad decisions. And of course, it's all based on biology, right? Our hormones, of course, we got cortisol, we got estrogen, testosterone, and then of course we got a host of other hormones that's not as known as those I just mentioned. But at the end of the day, you know, we can't get around how those hormones make us feel, right? But what we can do is we can control our behavior and our actions that come about as a result of that, right? And put sex into perspective, right? Just like we put anything into perspective, we got to put sex into perspective and have a healthy sex life, whether that's in a relationship or not. So, um, just something to think about so that we can stop just making bad decisions when it comes to being aroused and wanting to have sex. Nothing wrong with wanting to have sex. Got to put it into a proper context. We got to make sure that it's not ruining our lives to the point where people are feeling some type of way about us. Of course, you always hear from women that men only want to have sex. It's not that men only want to have sex, is that yes, men want to have sex, but we want to also make sure that we can get something else from it. Because if we're just getting sex from it, then that's just what it's going to be. Right. So which leads into bad decisions because women are like, you just want sex, 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 and she's going to change her thought pattern when it comes to not only you but the other men that she's going to date in the future. So there you have it, man. Episode 71, man. I appreciate y'all rocking with me as always. Please, 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 make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Hey, send me anything you want me to make the case on, and I'll make it happen for you. All right. So link's gonna be in the description. If you want to help the channel out, Cash App, all my social media handles, of course, being there, follow me. Hey, I am you, you are me. Love always, love eternal. Remember, the worst thing you do is lie to yourself, and I think we just made that case, baby. All right. Deuces. One love.